I just had a totally baffling experience in the middle of a field in southern Alberta, Canada. It literally just happened earlier today. First of all, I've got a bit of a solitary streak, I'll admit. Not that I don't enjoy the company of others, but there's something about being alone in the wild that just feels right to me. Additionally, photography recently became a hobby of mine, a way to capture the things that words couldn't quite do justice. It's not professional by any means, but it's a passion. That's what had me out there that day, hoping to catch a glimpse of something worth capturing through my lens. So, I was just sitting on my ATV with my binoculars, looking at deer on the opposite side of a small valley, about 200 yards away. There were several grazers, along with one very large buck that I estimated to be around 300 pounds. After I had been watching them for about 10 minutes, something strange occurred. Suddenly, all of the deer became alert and stared towards a section of trees to their left. Then they all ran as a group, off to the right and up the hillside. I kept staring at the section of trees where they were looking, but saw nothing unusual. I kept looking though, hoping to figure out what spooked them, and after about another minute or so, this crazy-looking thing came into view. It was taller than any man could possibly be, so a human being was ruled out. This thing's head was well above any tree branches surrounding it, and it kept having to duck as it walked. The body looked thin but muscular, with what appeared to be hairless gray skin. Its arms seemed disproportionately long for its body, as they hung down past its knees, which also appeared bent backwards, like some sort of bird leg, rather than being straight forward like our own legs. The creature stepped out from behind a large tree trunk, onto an open patch of ground, before swinging its head in the opposite direction, and then quickly moving back into cover again behind another tree. It's difficult to say how much time passed between me seeing this thing step out from behind cover and then disappearing again, because once you see something like this, your mind kind of goes blank, trying to comprehend what you're actually witnessing. Eventually, though, I regained my senses enough to look back through my binoculars, hoping it would come back out from behind cover, which thankfully it eventually did. It moved slowly and closer to where the deer had been standing earlier, which put it now within range for me to take pictures using my phone camera attached via a scope adapter. Even though this area is fairly flat terrain-wise, there are still slight rises and depressions throughout most fields here. So, due to those natural land formations, combined with the fact that this creature was hiding behind trees, I wasn't able to see its full body all at once. The first few photos only show it from about waist up, and later ones captured just a little bit more of its legs as well. The whole time I'm taking these pictures, my hands are shaking uncontrollably, so none of them turned out perfect, but some did come out better than others. I didn't want to keep looking through binoculars while also trying to take pictures, because I thought maybe if it saw me doing that, then maybe it would know I was there and watching it, which might cause it to attack me. Or perhaps the worst case scenario is that if this thing was intelligent enough to realize what I was actually doing, which was capturing evidence of its existence. Anyway, after about 5 minutes or so of standing in the same spot and moving very slowly closer towards where deer were grazing earlier, something caught its attention in the distance behind. I knew this because it swung its head around quickly, and it made a sudden, jerky move right before disappearing again behind a tree cover. Another minute passed by until it came back into view, but this time walking away from my location and heading straight toward the woods on the opposite side of the valley. Soon after reaching the tree line, it vanished, and I never saw it again. As soon as I realized it wouldn't be returning anytime soon, I eventually decided to pack things up and leave the area myself too. I'm not sure whether I will ever go back again, though I probably should go back there at least once and take someone else with me. I feel I need another set of eyes on this because nobody else seems to believe stories like these happen all over the world, every single day. This all literally just happened to me earlier today, and I'm still trying to decide who I should take back there with me. But I want to figure that out real quick, because I know it will get lonely knowing that I can't share this experience with anyone else who understands what truly exists up here in Alberta. Anyway, if you know of anyone who can help me understand all of this, please let me know. This happened a few years ago. I was on vacation with my family in a cabin at Shenandoah National Park. My mom, sister, and brother were off doing something while I stayed back to do my own thing for the day. And my dad was driving to the store to pick up some things we needed. I'm an avid hiker, so when my family left, I put on some clothes and headed out into the woods alone. The trail that was near our cabin led up to a peak where you could see for miles around. It was beautiful, but it wasn't too far from civilization, which meant that there were usually other people on it. As soon as I got onto the trail, though, I realized that today would be different because there was nobody else around except me. There's no feeling quite like being completely alone in nature, so I enjoyed every minute of it. Soon enough, though, the sun started setting behind one of the mountains, so I decided to turn back. It wasn't long before darkness quickly fell over everything. I had a flashlight with me, but instead of using it right away, I decided to try walking without any light, since there are times when your eyes can adjust well enough. It was like a test for me. Eventually, though, my night vision just wouldn't kick in properly, which made seeing very difficult. This is about when things began getting strange. Anyone who hikes often knows that if you pay attention enough, you start picking up little signs such as broken branches or rocks placed in certain ways, indicating animals might have passed through earlier. Well, after a while of hiking by myself in pitch blackness, I heard what sounded like someone walking nearby. But whenever I shone a light in the direction the noise seemed to come from, there'd be nothing there. But whatever this thing was, it kept following me. I don't know how many people are aware of this, but when you shine flashlights into complete darkness, sometimes, if somebody is standing directly inside a beam, you can actually make them out even more clearly than during natural light. It's true that their faces will seem clearer and crisper than they would in broad daylight. I know this because one night, while out with my friend, he was doing something I found amusing, so I shone a flashlight on him, and we both laughed. Then, for whatever reason, he put his hand over the light, and what happened next, it's hard to explain, but when his hand went up in front of the beam, everything became distorted. Now, why did I bring up such an odd story? Because whatever was following me down the trail began moving around between the flashes from my flashlight. I didn't notice at first since there weren't any clear breaks in the branches, but eventually, I started hearing movement from several different directions every time the light flashed. Almost like the beam from my flashlight was making the sounds, which would be weird. Nothing ever came into focus, however, and most sounds could be explained away by animals running through the brush. Then again, not everything I was hearing sounded animal-like. When the sound of snapping twigs started to come quickly, I knew these noises couldn't possibly belong to deer scurrying off deeper into the woods. A couple of times, when I shone the flashlight at the ground, I saw footprints in the dirt. However, the footprints didn't match any animal native to the area. Not only were the toes oddly shaped, but the depth of the prints suggested a weight far heavier than any animal could be. Then, as I continued walking down the trail and back towards the cabin, things kept getting weirder. There were times when I felt like something was standing right next to me, breathing into my face, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make anything out. Eventually, I decided enough was enough, so I turned the flashlight on full blast and started swinging around wildly, trying to catch whatever might be following me. It's hard to describe exactly what happened next, but the best I can say is that everything became distorted. Trees, which should have been stationary, began moving like waves crashing against the shore. Stars blinked and shifted positions across the sky until the entire world seemed to twist sideways. The worst part, though, despite the intensity of the beam, only darkness filled the space around. Not a single detail came into focus. This lasted several minutes before finally subsiding, and thankfully that's when things started to return to somewhat normal. I certainly did not feel like I was alone out there, and I don't mean that in a good way. I decided to run back to the cabin. I have to admit that I was terrified that night would take a wrong turn and end up lost or worse, dead. But somehow, I managed to find the correct path and eventually reach my destination without incident. Thinking back now, I realize I never heard noises once I had the flashlight on full blast, or while running back. Maybe they were scared off, or maybe they just gave up. Either way, I made it home safely. And let's just say that I'll never feel overly confident in the woods ever again. I now realize that nature has way more power than man ever will. I had a solo winter camping trip planned. I know it sounds like a crazy thing to do, but winter camping can be pretty fun if you are prepared for the weather. Plus, I had gotten some new camping gear for Christmas, and I just couldn't wait until summer to try it out. I was no stranger to winter camping, but it had been a while since I had my four-season tent out. I had organized to head to a hike-in campsite at local state forest lands, about 5 miles from the access road. The trails weren't groomed that time of year, so I had to snowshoe in. It was pretty tiring, but the one nice thing about winter camping is you can haul all your gear in on a sled. So, no backpacks are needed. There were no other cars in the parking area, and there were no signs of any other campers. Of course, this isn't unusual in the dead of winter, since there are not that many people who like camping when temperatures get below freezing. I finally got settled into my campsite, and after packing down enough snow to set up the tent, things started to look pretty nice. According to the map, there was an easy snowshoeing trail nearby, along a scenic river that I was excited to get to the following morning. It's not unusual for the forest to be a bit quieter in the winter. Snow muffles sound, and yet I hadn't noticed any wildlife on my hike in. I didn't think it was too strange at the time, but looking back, there was definitely something wrong right from the get-go. I had just started to boil some water to cook dinner when I heard something flying overhead. A shadow passed by, but I couldn't see what it was coming from. But I could tell that it was big, maybe an eagle or a great horned owl. I tried to find it but didn't see where it went. My campsite was surrounded by trees, so it didn't feel unusual to see a large bird around. The rest of the evening was uneventful. I settled in for the night and was toasty warm in my sleeping bag. I was just about to drift off to sleep when I heard a strange sound. Well, the sound itself wasn't strange, but it was the location. It was the sound of a bird flapping its wings, but it sounded like it was just outside the tent. I got my headlamp out and started to unzip the tent to chase whatever it was away. I didn't see anything immediately, so I slipped on my boots and stepped just out of the tent to look around. I didn't want to spend much time outside since it was getting cold. I pointed my light towards the forest. I didn't see anything in the trees, but something reflected back off the light, closer to the ground. There was no mistaking it. They were eyes. I didn't see the creature when I first looked, because it was standing between the trees. The only thing that gave it away was its eyes. If you didn't look close enough, it looked like maybe the outline of a small tree standing amongst the others. But it wasn't. I could now see that it looked like the dark outline of a man, but with wings. The eyes were about level with mine. I knew it wasn't human because our eyes don't reflect light like that. This looked like the reflection you see when you shine a light on a cat at night. It was staring directly at me, but it didn't move. I screamed at it, hoping that would scare it off, but it just stood there motionless and staring back at me. I didn't have any weapons on me except a small utility knife, and was now starting to worry about protecting myself if need be. Maybe I could bludgeon the thing with my fuel canister. I don't know. I couldn't hike out of there until the morning. Plus, I would have to walk right past the creature in order to leave. I didn't want to just go back into my tent, because then I wouldn't be able to see what it was doing. But there really wasn't a better option since I wasn't all geared up to be out in the cold. So that's what I ended up doing. I laid there awake all night, but the creature didn't bother me again. I looked for signs of it in the morning as I was packing up camp. There were no tracks anywhere, but I did find an assortment of small animal bones, organized into a ring around where my campfire had been. I'm not great at identifying bones, but I would guess they were maybe raccoon or fox-sized. After seeing that, didn't stick around to look for anything else. I packed my gear in record time and booked it out of there. As I was leaving, I heard the sound of wings again, but again I didn't see the creature, and I didn't stay to look for it either. I don't have any explanation for any of it. I never told my friends or family. Nobody would believe I saw some birdman creature in the forest. There isn't a great ending to this story. I never figured out what the beast wanted or what the assortment of bones meant. It didn't exactly try to harm me, and it knew where I was that entire night. So I figure that if it had wanted me dead, I would be dead. I don't know if I trespassed on its territory or set up camp right where it lives, or what. I can say for certain that I'm never going back there. So if it was trying to scare me off, it did a damn good job. I forget a lot of things. Small things mostly. The big things, the really important things, I never forget. I remember the shoes my wife was wearing on our first date. I remember the name of the doctor who delivered our child. I remember those things. For the most part, they're all good. They're all happy memories. I guess that speaks to the quality of my life, huh? I shouldn't complain, and normally I don't. There is one memory, though, from a time before all that happiness, that I've never been able to shake. I'd forget it if I could, but it's important, so we don't really get to decide which memories we keep, do we? I was camping in the backyard of my grandparents' property. They owned a few acres just outside of town, and turning all that land into my personal getaway was a highlight of my teen years. I'd fish at their little pond. I'd invite a few friends if I was in the partying mood. On this particular night, I was alone. I was stargazing. Out there away from the city lights, looking up at the night sky. That's as close to peace as you can get. I knew it even back then. I drifted asleep on the blanket I'd rolled out. That often happened. I'd wake up with a few bug bites, but I was never worse for wear. This time I woke up early. I didn't open my eyes to the light of the dawn. I didn't roll over into a face full of morning dew. It couldn't have been later than 3 a.m. Something was howling. I grabbed my flashlight and cut the beam across the land. My free hand was already shakily searching for the pepper spray that I knew was somewhere close. I always kept it nearby, even if my grandparents never had issues with bears or coyotes. But my light didn't land on a coyote. It landed on the naked back of a man. He was emaciated. I could count the ridges on his spine. He was facing away from me at first, hunched over something that he tore at with his hands. I didn't say a word. How could I? What I was seeing was worse than any wild animal. Animals had behavior patterns. You could predict things about them. Men, especially men looking like the one I saw, were unpredictable. But then I saw him change. I saw him change, and I couldn't stop myself from screaming. At first, it looked like his spine was wriggling underneath his skin. It jerked and curled and pushed up against his flesh. His shoulders hunched, and his hands slapped the ground. Then the fur started sprouting. It was like watching the time-lapse of a growing seed. The dark strands poked up from his skin and grew into a thick forest. When my screaming startled him, he whipped around. His face was no longer human. It was canine. If I hadn't known any better, I would have thought the thing in front of me was just a dog. A sick dog, but a dog surely. Yet I'd just seen it transform. Its eyes were still human. They looked back at me with a sadness at first, as if the creature was maybe embarrassed. Then its gaze was angry. I'd seen something I shouldn't have. It was going to make me pay. It was on me in a second. I could barely backpedal out of its reach. I was still on all fours, and I watched its long claws carve through my blanket with ease. It roared. I sprayed it in the face with my pepper spray. It yowled and recoiled, and I knew that was my only chance to run. I got to my feet and sprinted for my grandparents' home. It was further than I remembered. With every step, I was praying that the front door would be unlocked. If I had to fumble with my key, I'd be done for. I'm sure my grandparents feared it too. That's probably why. I sprinted, panted. I ignored the painful white-hot stitch in my side. I risked a glance back toward the monster. It was done pawing at its eyes. It was glaring back at me again. Then it was running. God, it was running. It tore across the earth like a machine. The rumble in its chest may as well have been a screaming engine. It shredded the ground, kicked up the grass and dirt, and it closed in on me with ease. But I was already on the front porch. I was already wrapping my fingers around the door handle. Then I burst inside. I crashed onto my face and forearms. I turned around wildly and kicked the door shut. The beast didn't have time to slow down. It slammed into the door. I heard it crumple against the solid wood. I scrambled as quickly as I could, turning the latch as it started to rake its claws against the frame. It spit and cackled and made sounds no animal should make. The ruckus woke my grandparents, of course. My grandfather fired a rifle through the door 3 times. That quieted the monster down. We peeked through the windows. We opened the front door. It was gone, of course. It was smart enough to know that it couldn't contend with a bullet. It was a long time before I slept outside again. The nightmares were pretty consistent. They were unforgiving. Sometimes it felt like the moment I closed my eyes, I'd be back in that chase. I wasn't sure that I could escape the monster every time. I'm sure my grandparents feared it too. That's probably why we never talked about it. Although I did catch my grandfather peeking through the windows whenever the night got dark. Eventually, I got brave. Eventually, I laid down beneath those stars again. I haven't seen the creature since, but that doesn't mean I've forgotten it. I always remember the important things. In the back half of my life, that means carrying a gun when I'm outside. I was headed toward my car on the last leg of my evening jog. I preferred jogging at the state park near my house instead of the road. I had seen one too many pedestrian accidents in my community to feel safe running on the roads in the evening hours. Although, after my experience in the park, I don't feel safe running there anymore either. I don't typically jog late at night, but my shift ran a little longer than usual. I will say that the park is a little more remote than is probably safe for night adventures. I haven't seen any weird people there after dark, but we do have quite a robust wildlife population in the area. Think: bears, cougars, wolves, moose. I was smart about it. I carried bear spray and made sure to play music on my phone when I was out after dark. Most animals, in my experience, will stay away from you if they hear you coming. I was maybe 2 miles from the car when I stopped to take a breather. I grabbed some water from my pack and decided to walk for a moment. The sun had set, but there was still some light left. I wasn't worried yet, but I knew I had to keep moving if I wanted to get out of there before dark. All of a sudden, an orange light shone behind me. It was like the sun came out for a moment. I knew there was nothing out there that could make a light that bright. It definitely wasn't someone's flashlight or even headlights from a vehicle. It was as bright as the sun. The whole forest ahead of me lit up in an orange glow. I turned around to see if I could find the source of the light, and it disappeared just as suddenly as it had arrived. However, standing behind me in the near darkness was a single deer. The moment I had turned around, I was hit with a stench of death and decomposition. It's so overpowering that I just about hit my knees. And like I said, it wasn't there a moment ago. I knew right away that it was coming from the deer. The creature was thin with ribs protruding through its skin. I was surprised its legs could support its weight. I figured it must be sick of have some type of gangrenous wound on it somewhere to be causing that type of stench. Despite its ill health, it had a rack of antlers spanning twice the width of its body. I almost felt bad for the creature, believing it was most likely sick and very, very old, but there was something else. I couldn't pinpoint the reason then, but I knew there was something else wrong. I tried to shoo the deer away, but it didn't budge. I still had a ways to go to get to my car, and I didn't want to turn my back on it. After failing to scare it away yet another time, I did decide to turn around and head toward my car. As soon as I turned my back, the orange light lit up the sky again. I spun around to face the deer. It was standing in the same place I had left it. I didn't know how, but I knew it had something to do with the light and the unmovable stench of death that filled the air. Its eyes were dark and soulless. "What the hell are you?" I asked it. And then the orange light returned, glowing bright like the sun, behind the deer. The whole forest was now lit with this artificial daylight. The deer then looked at me and began to lift its head as I watched its antlers turn upside down, like they were melting. They looked soft and started dripping, literally melting into the forest floor. But that wasn't all. The creature's fur began to slough off, exposing rotting skin and muscle underneath, and in some places, exposed bone. The skin of its face peeled back and rolled down its neck, like someone put a torch to it. The creature's entire skull was exposed, and its eyes were missing. Its jaw cracked open and fell to the ground, leaving its tongue nowhere to go but to fall in front of its neck. To say I was horrified was an understatement. My hands were shaking so badly that I couldn't get my bear spray out of its holster. I didn't know if the spray would have any effect on this thing, but it was all I had. I took a few stumbling steps backwards, and then the orange light ceased. Darkness fell upon the forest, and the creature standing before me was a deer once again. I had asked it what it was, and it showed me. It revealed its real and total self to me. I wondered what it wanted with me, but I didn't dare ask. I couldn't imagine it was anything good, so I turned and I ran. I don't think I've ever ran that fast before in my life. The creature didn't chase me, and I didn't experience the orange light shining again in the sky. Part of me thinks the creature was just screwing with me, because something that could do that could have probably made quick work of me if it wanted to. I don't know why it let me go, but I can tell you one thing for certain, and it's that I am staying the hell out of the forest after dark. Brockway Mountain Drive in Michigan is one of the most beautiful places in the world. I was in the service for almost 10 years. I saw a lot of the world, and still, that place between Copper Harbor and the Upson Lake Nature Sanctuary is one of the most beautiful. But on that day in December, the beauty was lost on me. My car was a mess. It was this rusted old coughing Ford Escort mini station wagon. It was on its last breath, but I really thought I could squeeze one more winter out from it. But as I rolled to the top of the Brockway Plateau just west of Copper Harbor, I had had enough. It died. It would not start, and it immediately got cold as is all get out outside. I already had a rusted out floorboard that caused snow and slush to spit up in my face while I was driving, and the passenger window was double thick saran wrap duct taped together. When it died on the top of the hill, I took a minute and got out and had a smoke. I then prepared for the ritual. The ritual was me heaving to push the car down the hill and pop the clutch to get it started. Today, my hope was only to make it back home. I had to get a new car. The time had finally come. I put it in neutral and pushed the Escort to the edge of the plateau, and with the driver's door open, gave her one last shove and then jumped in. Down the hill I went. I popped the clutch, and for the first time, the damn thing did not turn over. It rolled to the lull at the bottom of the road and just stopped. Crap. Now I was stuck here until someone came along to give me a ride, and I had no idea how long that was going to be. And to make things worse, I was down to my last smoke. I did not even bother to push the Escort off the road. I was so pissed off I just sat there and lit up my last Marlboro. I was leaning back, cold as hell and facing west, looking at the snow, trees, and the tiny, unlined, patched up, pothole-ridden pavement when a giant animal walks dead center. It was about 200 yards away. I almost choked on my cigarette. I felt all the hair on my body standing straight up. I lived in the Upper Peninsula, and we got so used to things, we sometimes forget that we are in the wilderness up here. And what the hell was this thing? I remember thinking, oh my God, as it stopped in the middle of the road and just started casually walking towards me. It was so terrifying for so many reasons. It was big, and it was coming at me. I was alone in a car that would not start. I had no idea what the hell it was. I immediately started turning the ignition. Come on, come on, come on, I started screaming. I was about to get out and run back up to the hill to the plateau, to the east behind me. The same hill I just had rolled down, but to my shock, the escort started. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. I was so happy. Then, this crazy-looking walking dog started yelling and began charging at me on all fours like a bull galloping at me. I wheeled the escort wagon around and puttered my way up the hill. I had already accepted death. That escort wagon would not make it get away from a child on a big wheel. All I could do was floor it and hope I purred up the hill and made it over the peak to the other side, headed toward Copper Harbor. I was so thankful the car did not die on me. I looked back and saw the devil spawn standing on the top of the hill, all proud and boastful, howling and screaming. Please make it back to town, I kept saying. And I made it back to town. After that, I did get another car, but I never sold the escort. I just could not part with her after she had saved my life from that dog man. What's your hobby? Personally, I've had a lot of them over the years, and sometimes it feels like I pick out a new one each summer. 3 years ago, it was kayaking. 2 years ago, I had a stint as a passionate birdwatcher. Don't ask me why, I must have been going through something. But last year's hobby is the hobby I want to talk about. Last year, along the same river, I often kayaked in the days past. I found a set of footprints. They were strange enough that I made a little mold and brought them home with me. I think for a lot of my friends, seeing those feet displayed on my coffee table was a little alarming. At first, you see, they just looked like the prints of any human. When I explained where I saw them, I sounded more like a kook than a curious adventurer. And that's what I was. I was curious and I set on a path of adventure. It all sounded so friendly and fun and fascinating back then. The feet were too big. That's what made them special. They were larger than any human's feet could possibly be. I did the research. Maybe there have been a few historical exceptions, but I didn't imagine that some giant had casually strolled barefoot through my area. They belonged to something else then. You see where I'm going with this, don't you? Anyway, that brings me to my most recent hobby. Last summer, I was a monster hunter. The prints became my hyperfixation. I took pictures of them and compared them to other findings online. I returned to the riverbed and searched for more evidence of whatever creature had left them. For a long time, I didn't have any luck. I found similar prints online, sure, but what did that prove? It certainly didn't rally any of my friends to my cause. No one suddenly approved of my fascination. In fact, the people around me were all begging me to move on to my next hobby. There was a limit to how often they wanted to hear about feet, I suppose, and I can't blame them. Looking back, I should have listened. They didn't know it, but they were warning me at the time. If I had moved on to something else, I wouldn't have gotten myself into so much trouble. I returned to the river with a renewed sense of purpose. The season was ending, and I wanted to be able to hoist something above my head that proved my fixation was justified. Did I know what that something would be? Absolutely not. So I did exactly as I'd done before. I combed the mud for more prints. At least a second discovery would prove that the first one wasn't a fluke. This time, I found them. I found the prints and the feet and the monster they were attached to. And I wished at that moment that I'd stuck to the bird watching. I didn't even notice it at first. The hulking mass was so large, squatting down by the river, that I couldn't recognize it as a living thing. My peripherals told me it was a stone, a boulder. Then it moved. It stood upright and erect. A stream of water ran from its large mouth and dribbled down its chest, sticking to the thick brown fur that covered its body. I'd never felt so small. Sure enough, it was a giant. And sure enough, looking down to the massive feet that sunk into the mud, it was the monster I'd been hunting for. Now that it was in my sights, I didn't know what to do. I froze. I froze and it turned, and all at once I realized I was cornered. Behind me was a forest of trees and brush that I knew I couldn't navigate quickly. The creature's legs were long and powerful. It would catch me in no time at all. I was lucky, I guess, that when it turned, it wasn't snarling. It didn't meet my gaze and roar. It didn't charge my position and leave the imprint of my corpse alongside its footprints. It could have. I could see the rippling musculature, even through its thick coat. I could see in the scars on its face, its strangely ape-like face, that it had fought and survived things a lot tougher than me. It stared. It heaved, letting out a mighty breath, and then it walked away. It crossed the river. The water only reached its chest at depths that I could have been swept away. It crossed and disappeared into the trees on the other side. Still, I was frozen. Something startled me out of the shock, I guess. I was safe after all, and I was facing what could have been my last chance at documenting my encounter. I didn't get any pictures of the beast, but I could still capture its prints. That was all I needed to begin with, right? Surely photographs of fresher impressions would confirm all of the theories I'd thrown around with my friends. I took the pictures. I sent them out. I had a dozen more late-night conversations, confessing my encounter and everything I'd felt that moment. I went into meticulous detail, ensuring that my friends would be able to visualize exactly what I'd seen. And none of them believed me. That's the other edge of this sword, isn't it? Even if you've discovered the truth, even if you found the proof to back it up, that doesn't mean the claims aren't outlandish. That doesn't mean anyone else is going to let that truth invade their beliefs and change how they view the world. None of my friends wanted to believe in the monster I saw. I can't blame them. I still think about that encounter sometimes. I still have nightmares imagining the 100 other ways that moment could have gone. I still ramble about the creature when I've had too many drinks. I still prefer the birds. The heat had been something that year. Insufferable. It had been so hot that a person might do anything to escape the Texas sun. I know I was willing to do a lot. I was willing to agree to take a trip with my friends, a little excursion to the west of the town we all grew up in. I was even willing to help pitch our tents right along the riverbed, only to make our trek to the cool water that much shorter in the mornings. It was cold by the river, and we were thankful for that. It was even colder with the water up to your shins. And that was glorious. Walk far enough out and you might even find the tender current rising as high as your shoulders. We would have held our heads underwater for hours if we could have just to escape the sun. Lucky for us, the trees were gracious. The cedar and elm formed a ramshackle canopy, a poor imitation of a real jungle, but they did enough to filter out the sky's harshest rays. We thought we'd found a little weekend of heaven, but we could not have been more wrong. Between the four of us campers, there was a firefighter, a welder, an aspiring survivalist vlogger, and a line cook. Under normal circumstances, we could have thrived out there. We could have established our own little community and fallen off the grid if we felt like it. Circumstances became abnormal on the second night. While the rest of us retired, the firefighter opted for a late-night swim. None of us were particularly concerned, considering the river never flowed at a dangerous pace. After we zipped our tents shut, we heard some splashing. That was uncharacteristic of the firefighter. We listened, each of us isolated in our tents, when we heard a grunt and a sudden scream, and we simultaneously leapt to action. All three of us discovered that we weren't the type to be paralyzed by our fear in that very moment. Despite our quickness, when we emerged from our tents, the firefighter was gone. The river was still. The woods were quiet. We laughed and congratulated our friend on a prank well pulled. But he didn't come back. We waited. We searched the area as well as we could in the dark. Exhaustion was heavy in our bones by the time dawn started to arrive. It became easier to search the more light that we had. The survivalists found some tracks leading away from the water, so we all followed them. Funny enough, the tracks led to where we parked our vehicles. We all had a laugh as we made our way back to the road. We had set into a dire panic instead of considering that the firefighter had just gotten spooked and ran for the cars. We figured that he was probably still asleep in the back seat of his vehicle. But we were wrong about that too. His car was gone. He hadn't just been spooked, he had been terrified. He left his phone back at camp, incapable of calling the rest of us. Before we could finish scratching our heads, a branch snapped in the woods behind us. Something was moving in there. It was heavy. It had to have circled around us as we arrived on the road, cutting us off from our campsite, cutting us off from our gear, our keys. But we weren't worried, at least not yet. We were shaken up, sure. We were suspicious, but we didn't know what we were facing yet. Then, when a man walked out of the woods with a face like a dog's, fear swallowed us whole. The stranger was covered in fur, and there was wetness in its eyes. Spit dribbled from its fanged mouth. Its upright ears flicked in the wind, turned to chase the sounds of the woods around us. Those ears folded flat against its skull when the creature's eyes narrowed at us. This must have been what had chased our friend. We didn't blame him for running. The vlogger muttered and pointed out that his keys were still in his truck. We now had a chance to get out of there after all. So we took it. We broke into a sprint all at the same time. Us three and the monster. We all vaulted over the hood of my small car and flung open the doors to the vlogger's truck. We jumped inside. Two of us in the back seat, one up front. Up front, the vlogger got his door shut just before the beast arrived. The two of us in the back weren't so lucky. A clawed hand swiped for my leg as I got in. I pulled it back just in time. The creature was moving too fast to stop when it closed in on the truck. It crashed into the door, slamming its own limb in the jamb. When it recoiled to try a second time, we lunged forward and grabbed the handle. When the lock clicked, saving us all, it raked its long claws furiously against the glass. By then, the engine started, which made the creature flinch and jump back, clearing enough of a path for us to reverse and peel out of there. We left our other cars behind. We left everything behind. We found the firefighter at his house. He actually lived the closest. None of us said a word, all knowing that we'd all seen something that defied explanation. We stayed there for the night, and when the next day came, we went back for the cars. Whatever was left at the campsite stayed there. None of us wanted to go back in to gather anything. We'd had enough of a brush with a monster. We weren't going to open ourselves to a second encounter. It's been a few years now, and the story hasn't come up between us. None of us has told a soul, not as far as I can tell. I guess that makes you all the first, at least outside of our group. I'm sure you'll forget about it quicker than the rest of us. Unless maybe you've seen something too. Joshua Tree National Park hosts the full range of Southern California's arid beauty. The wonder of the state's desert biomes is what first encouraged me to begin working in the region as a member of the National Park Service. For a long time it was perfect, and then it wasn't. There's a stone in Joshua Tree that attracts tourists from all over the world. It's the size of a small building and the shape of a skull. Its massive hollowed-out eyes are permanently fixated on the dry expanse of the park. I love that stone. I think maybe it loves me too. I know that's a weird thing to say. My skin crawls when I commit those words to paper. I'm only asking you to hear me out because it might be true. If it isn't love, it's something equally strong. Normally, to get a view of Joshua's stone skull, you have to wade between pockets of tourists and wait in line just for the chance of a brief photo op. If you arrive particularly early or particularly late, sometimes the crowd is a little thinner. When you work the park like I did, you know to visit the stone before the sun rises or after it sets. It's prettier in the dark, illuminated by the stars and the luminous pollution of California's distant cities. I was already headed toward the stone when I found him on the side of the trail, the man that cost me everything. He was dressed in worn clothing that looked to be centuries old. His feet were bare, and his hair was long and knotted. He didn't speak to me. He didn't call out or signal for help. He stood upright and immobile right on the edge of the trail, waiting. "Hello?" I remember asking his name. "What are you doing out here?" The park had chased away the last of the tourists nearly an hour before. This man looked like he had just crawled in from the desert. When he made no effort to reply, I reached out to touch him. His body wasn't warm. It was the same cool, ambient temperature as the rest of the air around us. He was more of the desert. Still, there was no response. I turned away from him briefly to contact my peers over the radio. I repeated his description and requested an emergency transport. When I looked back, the man was gone. Only the outline of his feet lingered in the dirt. I searched for a trail, anything to lead me back to him. There was nothing. I was alone. Then there was a howl. Wolves weren't common in the park, at least not around the well-traveled areas. I looked for one anyway, scanning the horizon for any signs of a wild dog or coyote. The howl sounded canine at least. What I saw wasn't a dog at all. It was standing upright, long-limbed but definitely humanoid. It started far away, but even with the great distance between us, I could tell the creature was approaching 7 feet tall. It threw its head back and howled again. Its protruding nose and jaw became visible, framed by the faint glow on the horizon. I did what felt natural. I ran for my life. I didn't know where to go except toward the skull. I sprinted as quickly as I could, kicking up dust and debris all along the trail. I cut across the unmarked paths where I could, trampling the brush and undergrowth. I didn't risk a glance back, but I knew it was behind me. I could hear its claws slicing through the same stems and stalks that I was flattening with my boots. I could feel its deep, heavy breathing reverberating in my bones. I never thought my life would flash before my eyes. Not in my line of work. Supervising tourist destinations isn't exactly the most dangerous of park ranger responsibilities. That night, I saw it all. I saw my 5th birthday and my father's funeral. I saw my partner and our child. It felt like I was running toward those moments, toward the idea of making more of those memories. But in reality, I was headed somewhere else. I was headed toward the skull, and finally its broad dome-shaped crown was overlooking my insignificant body as I ran across the desert. I could see its brow and its eye sockets, then the grooves that always looked a little too much like teeth. The skull isn't haunted, I know that. It isn't possessed. Those ideas make for great conversation when you're a one-time visitor to Joshua Tree, but none of the rumors are true. Maybe it is sacred though, somehow. Maybe it is a safe place. I ran up the hill surrounding the stone, and when I finally reached its base, I slipped. I crashed face first into the dirt and skidded to what I was sure would be my end. I weakly rolled onto my shoulder and looked back the way I'd come. The monster wasn't there. It wasn't breathing down my neck or raising a clawed hand to finish our chase. It wasn't circling the perimeter, waiting for the perfect time to strike. It was just gone, as if the skull had repelled it. I inched back toward the desert and found more footprints in the dirt. Bare human footprints. When my peers arrived, prepared to escort the stranger back to our medical facility, I was hysterical. I didn't know how to stop talking about what I'd seen. Even as the days stretched into weeks, I was released from the service shortly after that, with instructions to consider my mental health. They cast me out and told me to keep quiet. That's why I'm talking. That's why I'm telling the story. There must be a reason they want to keep it secret, right? Someone doesn't want the world to know about the man in the desert. Someone doesn't want the world to know that the skull-shaped rock in Joshua Tree might actually be protecting us. I'd like to share this wild card of an encounter that happened during one of my deep-sea explorations. I'm a deep-sea diver by profession, and have been for a couple of decades now. This unforgettable encounter happened just a few years back. My team and I were stationed off the coast of Maine for a mission. Our job was to chart a previously unexplored underwater cave. Nothing too out of the ordinary. We set off in the afternoon. The sun was casting the ocean into a beautiful blush, as we boarded the watercraft. The first few hours of the dive went as expected. I inspected the undersea terrain, took numerous samples for the lab, and marveled at some rare crustaceans. I remember I was in a narrow section of the cave, looking at a curious rock formation, when things started to get a little strange. The water became colder, way colder than it had been before. It was like ice water all of a sudden. Moreover, I started to feel this presence around me. It's hard to explain without sounding crazy, but I felt like there was something else down there with me. And it wasn't just some harmless fish or crustacean. Visibility wasn't the best despite my lights. All I could make out was the vague, murky outline of the cave ahead. I couldn't see any close details until I was practically on top of them. No fish, sea plants, or bottom dwellers. It was just the cave. I checked and double-checked my equipment but could see nothing out of the ordinary. I propelled myself out of the narrow cavern, my bubbles disturbing the otherwise quiet water around me. The teams were stationed at various depths, which meant communication was sparse at best. At that moment, it was just me, my thoughts, and the eerie sensation of being watched in this alien-like icy blue world. I was all of a sudden overcome by a strong smell. It was overpowering, even through my diving equipment. It wasn't like any of the normal ocean smells. It was like something nearby was rotting. I tried to shake off the gruesome smell and creeping unease and refocus myself on the job at hand. I spent a while, from what I can gather from my receding chest cam footage, examining a peculiar formation on the cave floor. Measure, document, repeat. That's what I kept telling myself. Besides the strange smell, I didn't have any reason to be frightened, but I wanted to get my work done and get out of there as quickly as possible. As I was rushing along, trying to get everything recorded, I heard a low, resonant roar that seemed to originate from somewhere deep in the cave. It was like a vibration that moved through the water and echoed around me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Why I didn't break for the surface then is beyond me. Maybe I was just too dumbfounded by what I was seeing that I was frozen in place. I can't tell you. At first, it just looked like shadows moving in the darkness just beyond the reach of my flashlight. It was too massive, too foreboding to be any regular occupant of the cave system. Barely visible in the murky depths, I saw these large, sinewy, limb-like structures undulating in the water and casting disjointed shadows on the cave walls. Tentacles, I thought to myself, but they didn't look like any squid or octopus I had ever seen, and I'm pretty familiar with local sea life. No, these were reminiscent of the tales of sea monsters from sailors of yore. Whatever it was huge. I felt microscopic in comparison. Still, there was something bewitching about seeing an anomaly of nature. It was fascinating and terrifying at the same time, the size of the beast dwarfing everything else in my peripheral vision. The cave must be much bigger than we had previously thought, because the creature living inside was simply massive. I'm sure this creature could have sunk a ship easily if it wanted to. Suddenly, a tentacle shot out, revealing gleaming scales illuminated by my torchlight. There was not a creature alive that I knew of that had both tentacles and scales on its body. This was something undiscovered. Shivers raced down my spine as I came to the realization that I needed to get out of there and get out quick. If this thing wanted to harm me, there wouldn't be a damn thing I could do about it. I felt like I was in a dream. This couldn't be happening. It just wasn't possible. I began my retreat from the cave, leaving the creature and the rest of my work in depths behind me. My wake seemed to go unnoticed by the sea monster, or perhaps it just simply didn't care. Whatever the reason, I can tell you it was without a doubt the most terrifying moment in my career. I couldn't relax until I reached the boat, and even then, I didn't feel safe from the creature. Did it even notice me down there, and if it did, why didn't it care? I'm sure I would have made an easy meal for it if it were inclined to eat me. Later, safely aboard the watercraft, more thoughts swarmed my mind. Did this thing come from the deep sea? Are there more of them out there? Could it really have been a sea monster of ancient folklore? Fear intermingled with a sense of awe as I recollected the size and peculiarity of the creature. I pondered if there could be more uncharted caves harboring unfathomable secrets of the deep. A part of me, the part forged from years of insatiable curiosity, yearned for another encounter. But the rest, the natural instinct of survival, implored me never to return to the area. Wherever I recount this story, I am reminded of how very little we know about our world and the abyss that lies just beyond our understanding. It all started in the spring of 2015, when I was stationed at Nellis Air Force Base. If the name rings a bell, it's probably because it's a stone's throw away from the infamous Area 51. As a seasoned fighter pilot, I've spent a fair share of my life in the cockpit, testing state-of-the-art avionics systems over the Nevada desert. It's a job I had dreamed about since I was a kid, and let me tell you, flying one of those fighter jets is every bit as exhilarating as you'd imagine. However, on that particular day, excitement wasn't exactly what I was feeling. It was another routine test flight, just me and my F-22 Raptor streaking across the sky at 30,000 feet. The desert unfurled in front of me, an endless stretch of barren land that, after all these years, still held a certain sense of alien beauty for me. With my helmet on, snug in the confines of the cockpit, my hands intuitively worked the buttons and switched the controls. My fingers traced the familiar grooves of the steering stick, the reassuring weight of authority at my fingertips. Across the polished instrument panel, multicolored lights blinked, each tracked and analyzed by dozens of tiny sensors. Every 5 minutes, I cast a trained eye over the radar screen. It's a force of habit, especially when you're flying into an expanse of nothing but sky and sand. That day, as my eyes scanned the radar, something odd popped up. It was a tiny, inexplicable blip. For a moment, my mind thought it was nothing more than a glitch, maybe a stray bird, or worse, a malfunction in the system. But deep down, my gut twisted with a sense of unease that was hard to ignore. "Control, this is Sierra 21, I radioed, my voice muffled under the mass of my helmet and the hum of the engine. "I've got an unidentified contact on my radar, 9 miles out and closing in fast. Please confirm if there are any other units in the vicinity." Sure as hell, I knew there shouldn't have been. My flight plan had been penciled in weeks ago, and a sizable air gap separated me from any other scheduled flights. But there it was, on my radar screen, and it was rapidly closing in on my position. Responding to my call, Control's voice crackled over the headset, saying, "Sierra 21, the skies are clear. The anomaly must be an error." But something in my gut told me it wasn't just a glitch. The blip was drawing closer. Dipping the nose of my jet, I descended for a visual inspection. The surface of the desert gradually enlarged on my screen as I went lower, the Earth's details sharpening into focus. A tumbleweed interrupted the smooth undulation of sandy waves amidst the shadows thrown by jagged mountaintops. Against this backdrop, a shape materialized. My breath hitched as I got a clear view. It was a silver object and shaped just like a flying saucer out of a science fiction movie. The exterior appeared to be a mix multiple types of metal, one non-reflective while the other had an uncanny iridescence to it. The craft stood out starkly against the arid landscape. It was the size of an average sedan, but as I inched closer, it began to glow, illuminating the surrounding airspace with a vibrant light show of blue and red. It was completely impassive, hovering motionlessly as if time had frozen for it. But suddenly, it tilted on an invisible axis, and then it shot upward. It moved rapidly, subtly morphing as it went, rounding out, the spinning lights on the object intensifying. I jerked back on the stick, pitching my jet into a swift ascent, adrenaline pumping thrumming veins as I chased the UFO. It moved erratically, buzzing with a sound that seeped into my cockpit, a low-frequency vibration that seemed to shake the very atoms in the air around me. As I drew nearer, a blast of white light erupted from the object. Squinting through the bloom, I saw it alter its trajectory, angular momentum carrying it around in a sheer arc, and in doing so, defying the very principles of aerodynamics I learned at the academy. Half out of instinct, half from bracing fear, I whacked the transmit button on my control panel. Sierra 21 to control. I'm in visual contact with an unidentified aerial vehicle. I repeat, I have a UFO in my sights, I hollered. But the radio remained eerily silent. We danced in deadly synchrony until, without warning, the object flared brighter. A pulse of energy erupted from it, bathing my jet in a garish light before it jettisoned off into the darkening horizon in an instant. The craft slipped from my sight as if it had never been there in the first place. The skies went quiet after that, and the only reply I received from control was echoing static. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. It was nothing short of extraordinary and terrifying. My mind worked hard to explain this unprecedented phenomenon, only to realize it was an act of futility. As I guided the Raptor back towards the base, I collected my thoughts, realizing that the reality I knew had just been dramatically reshaped. For weeks after the incident, I felt a hollowed sense of emptiness. People asked questions, offered hypothesized reasoning, and I grappled with the constant unbelief that hung heavily in their gaze. Despite the disbelief and ridicule, I know what I saw. I could never forget the metallic object, the unearthly hum of its engines, those blinding lights. In the silence of the night, I'd lie awake, gazing at the star-studded sky, pondering if we were really alone in this vast cosmos. Unsettling as it was, the encounter imparted me with a revered sense of the unknown, forever changing my perspective of the sky and beyond. This is an account of an event that happened a couple of years back. I lived in Flagstaff, Arizona at the time, and a friend of mine invited me to a rare cultural experience, a Navajo ceremony in Monument Valley. My friend Mike worked as a community liaison between the local government and the Navajo tribe, so he had numerous opportunities to learn about their traditions and participate in their ceremonies. He'd often spoken of the rich blend of heritage, tradition, and spiritual practices of the Navajo people, and I must admit, I was always intrigued. The towering sandstone buttes of Monument Valley, changing shades with the passing hours from rich reds to deep purples, stood sentinel as we drove to the venue. The breathtaking panorama was a living testament to the various nature-centric narratives woven into Navajo lifestyle and mythology. I had seen Native American ceremonies in movies, rhythmic drumming, beautiful clothing, emotional dances, an exotic concoction of awe and respect. But to be present at an intimate ceremony, I felt a wave of humility wash over me, the sacredness of the occasion inexplicably resonating within. As evening fell, we've reached our destination. The air was dense with the aroma of roasting corn and juniper smoke. The elders greeted us warmly, treating us more like welcome guests than outsiders. Mike translated their words, and their expressive gratitude for our participation left me touched. The ceremony started with a slow, rhythmic drumming that seemed to echo the beating heart of the land around us. The rising moon cast long dancing shadows as the entire group moved in harmony. Despite not knowing the precise steps, I found myself swaying to the rhythm naturally, feeling an unexplainable connection to the ground below and the stars above. After the main event of the ceremony, a feast was laid out, and I received the opportunity to try their traditional foods. The evening drew on, and most people gradually drifted away, except for a few, including some of the elders. Mike and I stayed on by the fire, Mike translating the old Navajo stories. That's when it started. An uncanny shift in the ambience. The flames of the fire pit, which had been flickering merrily, seemed to dim. A silence washed over the area. The earlier sounds of laughter faded away, replaced by what seemed like whispers in the wind. The elders looked visibly perturbed. Then, a sound broke through the eerie quiet, a shrill, unholy laughter that seemed to hang in the air around us. The noise was unfamiliar and terrifying, echoing off the silent buttes around us. It took me a moment to realize, horrifyingly, that the laughter was an imitation of Mike's own rich, resonant chuckle. The connection was undeniable and utterly chilling. Suddenly, I noticed a shadow move at my peripheral vision, a slender, agile form, swifter than any man, darting between the buttes. It was too quick for me to make out more than an impression. A sense of long limbs and a hunched posture. The impression of speed and stealth. The moonlight barely touched it, like it was made of the shadows themselves. Something deep within me, an age-old primal instinct, echoed a singular warning in my mind. Danger. That's when I heard it. A noise that set my hairs stand on end. It was Mike's voice, but wrong. Repeating a phrase that he had earlier spoken. Except Mike wasn't talking. He was sitting right by me, his mouth closed, his eyes wide. That twisted mimicry drifted over to us from the shadows, clear as day. And then a figure emerged from the shadows. At first, I thought it to be a man, about 6, no, maybe 7 feet tall. But as it stepped forward into the dim moonlight, I noted something strangely off-kilter. Its posture was entirely wrong, hunched, jerking, but still graceful in a malevolent way. The face struck a vague resemblance to human, but haggard and distorted in such a way that screamed unnatural. A new odor wafted from the figure, earthy and musky, like a wild predator, but undercut with the scent of decay. Up till that moment, I'd entertained a desperate wish that it was a mindless prank. But that smell, grotesque and so out of place, along with those horribly familiar words coming from this creature, shattered every hope. The elders immediately snapped into action. Their faces were masks of terror, counteracting their aura of warmth and welcome from earlier. They hurried us away from the fire, whispering among themselves in demeaning tones. We huddled together, looking back at the fading light of our once joyous gathering. That's when I saw it. The creature, its form shifting in the shadow. Its monstrous shape melted away, replaced by something smaller, like an owl. The transformation was fluid, almost mesmerizing in its horror. The owl thing took off silently into the night. The whole encounter must have lasted all of 5 minutes, yet it felt like a small eternity. In the deafening quiet left behind by its exit, our heartbeats thrummed loud against the silence. We stole away that night, leaving our campsite undisturbed. Mike and I drove away in silence, his hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. The faces of the tribesmen, filled with such warmth and kindness earlier, transformed with pure, unadulterated fear, would be forever seared into my mind. The following week was a haze. We didn't talk about what happened. Heck, we didn't even talk to each other for a few days. Over time, words gradually returned. But that incident, well, yeah, that was the elephant in the room. The sight of it, the smell, and that voice has left a mark on my perception of reality. It's like someone lifted a veil from my eyes, revealing a world that was deeply interwoven with our own, and yet a terrifying realm apart. This all still feels very raw, very real. I sometimes wonder if it was all a figment of my imagination. I try to view it as an adventure, an experience that lent a standpoint to my narrow understanding of the world. But that step comes with its own set of monsters, doesn't it? Supernatural, unseen, taboo, terrifying. The words of fictional ghost stories that had once seemed so distant now find a reasonable place in my reality. Now, when night falls, I sleep with one eye open, all ears tuned to the wind's whispers, always waiting, always watching. This story is going to sound crazy, but every word is true. My wife and I have been married for 8 years. No kids yet, but maybe someday. I work in IT and Samantha's a teacher. Not the type to make up stories or see things that aren't there. We'd been saving up for years to buy a piece of land to build our dream house. Finally found this perfect spot in Northern California, right in the heart of the redwoods. Beautiful, secluded, just the kind of place we wanted. It's near this little town called Oric, not far from the coast. You've probably never heard of it. Anyway, we head out there one weekend to check out the land, map out where we're going to build, that kind of stuff. It's a gorgeous day, I remember as well. We're walking through the woods, talking about where we'll put the kitchen, how big the deck should be, that sort of thing. And then, out of nowhere, we hear this weird noise. It's this deep, low sound. kind of like a moan, but not exactly. I look at Samantha and she's got this puzzled look on her face. We stop walking and just listen. There it is again, that sound. Only now it's closer. We're standing there trying to figure out what it could be. We're not exactly experts on wildlife, so we're just guessing. Now, the trees in this part of the woods are super thick, so you can't see very far ahead. We're squinting, trying to see if there's anything moving between the trees. That's when we see it. This huge figure, standing maybe 30 yards away from us. It's covered in hair, dark brown, almost black. It's standing on two legs, like a person, but it's no person. It's easily over 7 feet tall. Samantha grabs my arm, tight. Neither of us can believe what we're seeing. It's just standing there, looking at us. I remember thinking it's got to be a person that we are mistaking for a creature. But deep down, I know it's not. The way it's standing, the size of it, it's too real. The creature, or whatever it is, doesn't move. Just stands there looking the other way, but turning its head slowly. It finally turns enough that it sees us, but nothing at all happens. And then, as if it decides we're not a threat, or maybe not interesting, it turns and walks away. Just like that. It moves gently. In one moment it's there, the next it's gone, blending into the trees. Samantha and I are still standing there, not moving, not speaking. Finally, she looks at me and asks if I saw it clearly. I just nod. We're both shaken up. In my mind, I'm thinking, was it a Sasquatch? It couldn't be, right? But what else could it be? We decide we've had enough exploring for one day. As we make our way back to the car, the silence between us is heavy. It's like neither of us wants to be the first to say what we're thinking. We get into the car, and I start the engine, but neither of us is in a hurry to leave. We just sit there, staring out at the forest. Finally, Samantha breaks the silence. "That was a Sasquatch, wasn't it?" she asks, her voice barely above a whisper. I can only nod. What else could it be? Sure, I've heard stories, seen those TV shows, but I never really believed. Not until now. We start talking then, trying to rationalize what we saw. Maybe it was something else, but we both know it's not true. Normal animals don't walk like that, don't look like that. This was something else, something neither of us has ever seen before. The drive back to our place is quiet, both of us lost in our thoughts. Every now and then, one of us would start to say something, then stop. What can you say after seeing something like that? When we get home, we go straight to the internet. We spend hours looking up Sasquatch sightings, trying to find anything that sounds like what we saw. There are a lot of stories, some of them not far from where we were. It's a bit comforting, I guess, knowing we're not the only ones who've seen something. But the more we read, the more unsettled we become. There are so many stories, so many sightings, and yet it's all treated like a big joke. How can so many people see something, and still, it's not taken seriously? We talk about going back, maybe trying to see it again. The next few days are weird. We try to go about our lives, but it's like there's this cloud hanging over us. We're distracted, jumpy. Every little noise makes us jump. It's like we're waiting for the other to suggest going back. And we're not really talking to anyone else about it. But it's hard, keeping something like that a secret. It feels like it's always there, just under the surface, waiting to come out. And I keep thinking about that land, our dream home. Can we still build it there, knowing what's out in those woods? Samantha and I had long conversations every night, going over every detail. We even started having dreams about it, or at least I did. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, feeling like it was standing right outside our window, or worse yet, next to our bed. A few weeks go by and we're still on edge, but life has to go on, right? We've got this piece of land, and we've got plans. We can't just abandon everything because of one weird encounter. So we decide to go back. I know it sounds crazy, but we had to see it again. We drive up there again, this time with a bit more caution. We tell ourselves we're just going to look at the land, make some plans, nothing more. But I think both of us are hoping, maybe even expecting, to see it again. We get there, and everything looks the same, peaceful and quiet. We start walking around. pointing out where we'd put this and that. But it's different. We're constantly looking over our shoulders, listening for any sound out of the ordinary. Hours pass, and there's no sign of anything, nothing to suggest it was ever even there. I'm not sure if I'm relieved or disappointed. It's confusing, feeling both at the same time. We're about to head back when Samantha grabs my arm. She's staring at something in the trees. I look, and there it is, the Sasquatch, standing just at the edge of the woods, watching us. It's farther away this time, but it's definitely the same creature. This time I can see it more clearly. It's tall, incredibly tall, with arms that hang down past its knees. Its face is partly covered in hair, but I can see its eyes. Then, just like last time, it turns and walks away, disappearing into the forest. We don't say much on the drive back. We saw it again, and we're both thinking about it. It's real as anything. And now we have to decide what to do about our land, our dream. Do we build there, knowing what's out in those woods, or do we give up on it? That's where we're at now, stuck in this limbo. We haven't made a decision yet. It's hard, knowing there's something out there, something unknown and wild. And that's the story, as crazy as it sounds. A real-life Sasquatch encounter, not once but twice. Makes you wonder what else is out there, doesn't it? I'm not what you'd call a typical guy. And with that, I don't have a typical job. My job? I'm an antique restorer, specializing in old mechanical devices. Think clocks, music boxes, that sort of thing. It's a niche skill, but I've always been fascinated by the intricacies of mechanisms that have stood the test of time. This job takes me to all sorts of places, usually old homes or estates where forgotten treasures lie, gathering dust in attics and basements. This story takes place in late September, on a vast property in rural Montana. I was there because the owner, an elderly gentleman who had recently passed away, had an extensive collection of antique clocks. His family wanted them appraised and restored where necessary before they were auctioned off. The estate was a sprawling piece of land, with dense woods bordering it and a few dilapidated structures scattered around. One of these was an old barn, standing lopsidedly in a field. Its wood was gray and weathered from years of harsh winters. I arrived late in the afternoon. The plan was to stay overnight in the main house, start work early in the morning. My truck, loaded with tools and equipment, rumbled along the gravel path leading to the barn. I figured I'd check out the barn first. These places sometimes hide the most unexpected antiques. Something about that barn felt weird to me, weirder than other barns I've rummaged through. Not in a haunted house movie kind of way, but there was a tangible sense of strangeness. As I neared the barn, a soft scraping noise came from within. The rational part of me thought it was just animals inside who had taken over, but the rest of me wasn't convinced, based mostly on the sound. I hesitated, then pushed the creaking barn doors open. The light coming through the broken wood made everything look a bit distorted, and at first it was hard to make anything out. But then, as my eyes adjusted, the sight that greeted me was something out of a dark fantasy. In the dim light filtering through the cracks in the barn, I saw it. A creature, impossibly tall and thin, with skin like pale, dead leaves. It was hunched over, almost as if it was in pain, and its arms were unnaturally long, fingers ending in sharp, talon-like nails. But it was the creature's eyes that held me, a piercing, glowing yellow, glowing in the dim light. I knew instantly that I was looking at a crawler, something I'd heard in passing tales, but never believed to be real. Yet here it was. The creature didn't move towards me, and I slowly began to back away, not wanting to provoke it. Its gaze followed me, but it remained still. These creatures were the stuff of local legends. They were said to inhabit remote, forgotten places, lurking in the shadows, always just out of sight. The crawler's presence was overwhelming. Despite its frightening appearance, it didn't seem aggressive. It just stood there, observing me with an intense curiosity that felt almost human. Its head tilted slightly, as if trying to decipher what I was, much like I was trying to understand it. Its skin, a ghastly pale, stretched tightly over its bony frame. The ribs were visible under the skin, each breath it took causing them to rise and fall slowly. The arms, unnaturally long, hung by its sides, ending in elongated fingers that scraped the ground. But those eyes, those unblinking, glowing yellow eyes, held an intelligence that contradicted its monstrous form. I couldn't move, not just out of fear, but out of a strange sense of awe. Here was a creature that defied all logic, a being that shouldn't exist, yet it stood mere feet from me. Its gaze never left mine. Then, breaking the silence, the crawler emitted a low, rasping sound. It wasn't a growl, but something more complex, almost like a form of communication. I obviously didn't understand it, but the sound sent shivers down my spine. Then the air in the barn grew colder, or maybe it was just my nerves. I realized then that I had to put distance between myself and this creature. As I stepped back, the crawler mimicked my movement, retreating further into the shadows of the barn. I backed out of the barn, never turning my back on the creature. As the daylight faded outside, the crawler's figure became a part of the shadows, indistinguishable from the darkness. The rest of the night passed in a blur of restless thoughts. But that next morning, I found myself drawn back to the barn. A part of me needed to see the crawler again. As I approached the barn, the morning light revealed more of its dilapidated state. The wood creaked with each step I took. I half expected the crawler to be there, waiting for me, but the barn was empty, save for the lingering sense of its presence. I spent the day working in the main house, cataloging and examining the antique clocks. Yet, my mind kept drifting back to the barn. As evening approached, I decided to take one last walk around the property. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the fields. The air had a chill to it. Or again, maybe it was my nerves. I found myself standing at the edge of the woods, looking into the dense thicket of trees. It was then I heard it again, the same low, rasping sound I had heard from the crawler. It was coming from the woods now. Without really thinking, I followed the sound, my feet carrying me deeper into the forest. The trees grew closer together, the canopy above blocking out the remaining light. The sound grew louder, more insistent, and then there it was, standing at the edge of a clearing. Its eyes glowed in the dim light, and it watched me approach. This time, there was a sense of recognition, as if it remembered me from the barn. I stopped a few feet away, unsure of what to do next. The crawler tilted its head, studying me. Then, slowly, it stepped forward, closing the distance between us. My heart raced, but I didn't move. It stopped right in front of me, its towering form looming over me. For a long moment, we just stood there, human and cryptid, facing each other. Then, with a movement that was almost gentle, the crawler reached out with one of its long arms. I flinched instinctively, but it merely touched my shoulder, its fingers surprisingly warm against my skin. In that touch, I felt a rush of emotions: curiosity, loneliness, a deep, unspoken understanding. The moment was brief. The crawler withdrew its hand and stepped back, melting into the shadows of the forest. I was left standing there alone. As I walked back to the house, I knew that this experience would change me forever. I had come to this property as an antique restorer, but I was leaving with a story that was more extraordinary than any object I had ever worked on. The crawler, a creature of myth and legend, was now a part of my life's experiences. A couple of years ago, I took a trip to Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness in Minnesota. I went out there because my grandfather had grown up in Minnesota and always talked about the Boundary Waters. It was the 1-year anniversary of his passing, and I wanted to head there to honor him and see the area with my own eyes. It was smack in the middle of summer. The sun felt nice and not too hot, and the blueberry bushes were packed with ripe berries. So I was just standing there at one point, picking and eating some berries. You know, as you pick the ripe blueberries, their juice stains your fingers and it smells fresh and natural. It's such a simple activity, but it's pretty satisfying if you're the type who enjoys nature. You kind of lose track of time when you're out in the woods like that. There I was in this endless forest, surrounded by big old trees, picking blueberries when something suddenly stopped me. I remember the moment exactly. I was looking at a bush full of ripe berries, hidden under broad leaves. You could hear the sound of crickets in the background. Suddenly, I heard a strange noise. It was a deep growl that made the hairs on my neck stand up. It totally caught me off guard. Even the usual sounds of the crickets seemed to quiet down with the noise. I would say you could have cut the tension with a knife. I was looking around, trying to figure out where that noise was coming from. It's weird how your mind plays tricks on you when you think you're in danger. Every little noise and shadow starts feeling suspicious. There was also this really bad stench in the air. The horrible smell really freaked me out. It made me feel like something bad had happened, or was about to happen. It was like my gut telling me to be careful because something dangerous was close. I then saw a shadow out of the corner of my eye. That's when it hit me. I wasn't the only one in the forest. Something big then jumped out of the bushes at me, and everything got really quiet. Everything was so still, it felt like even the wind stopped. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Right there, under the tall pine trees, was this massive creature, slightly bent as if its massive torso was too much for its strong muscles. In the sunlight, it looked more like a beast than anything I'd ever seen, with a huge chest, strong arms with long, deadly claws and wide shoulders. It had a thick fur coat that was a mix of gray and brown. Basically, the thing looked like a mix of a man and a dog. Normally, I'd find that funny, like something you'd see in a comic book. But this wasn't funny. It scared the heck out of me. I was totally freaked out when we locked eyes. They were yellow and beamed like they knew it was at the top of the food chain. It really scared me to my core. By now, it started growling and grunting, making the air around feel heavy with a bad vibe. I was sure it was threatening me. Its long snout moved and wrinkled, showing off a solid jaw and a mouth that was drooling. I didn't waste any time and I took off running. I thought I was quick to begin with, but being scared made me run faster than I thought I could, and I didn't even notice the branches hitting my face and arms. I dashed into the thick forest, hoping it would hide me from the animal that I was sure was stalking me. I finally reached my car and struggled with the keys because I was so panicked. I was expecting to feel its claws on my back at any moment, but it never happened. I hopped in the car, started it, and drove off really fast, leaving a bunch of dust behind and cranking up the radio to cover up my heavy breathing. After that, I couldn't look at the woods the same way. Every little shadow scared me. Every sound from the leaves freaked me out. Did I stumble upon something in the woods that I shouldn't have? It took me a bit to remember where I'd heard of such creatures before. Old myths and stories from loggers, campers, and hikers, stuff most people just wrote off as campfire tales, suddenly seemed real. I also remember what they called the thing I saw. They called it a dogman. My wife and I were in Big Bend National Park in Texas last year, at the end of April. We decided to take a trip down there to see if we could spot any of the unusual creatures that have been reported there over the years. I had read about the Marfa lights, also known as the Marfa ghost lights, and thought it would be interesting to investigate some of these strange phenomena that have been reported for many years. I was stationed at Fort Bliss, Texas in El Paso, back in 1969 to 1970, and remembered hearing stories about these lights. It seemed like every time someone mentioned them, they also talked about being chased by something out in those hills. As far as my knowledge on this subject is concerned, I don't think anyone has ever really explained what causes these lights, or who or what is chasing people around out there. There seems to be a lot of folklore connected with both phenomena. We left our home near Tucson on Monday and drove half of the 9+ hour trip, and we arrived at Big Bend early Tuesday afternoon. We checked into one of the cabins within the park boundaries, then went up into Terlingua, a small town just a bit northeast. Then drove a bit further to La Kiva Bar and Restaurant to grab a bite to eat before heading back into our cabin for an early evening sleep. The next day, we started hiking around after breakfast until mid-afternoon when it got too hot. Texas at this time was already 90 degrees. As nightfall approached, my wife wanted us to head up north from Panther Junction towards Persimmon Gap, where she heard reports that people often saw shadowy figures running alongside their vehicles. She thought it may have something to do with skinwalkers, which she read quite a bit about while living in Arizona, but it was getting too late, so we gave up on that idea. I asked one of the rangers about any sightings or reports concerning Bigfoot in the area. He told me that there have been many stories over the years, but nothing substantial except for tracks found here and there. I thought this was interesting information. The only problem they had was trying to determine what made those impressions on the ground. They weren't deep enough to make out details, but they seemed odd. We got back to our cabin around 9 p.m., opened up all windows, then went outside onto the porch area with binoculars and my camera mounted on a tripod. We waited until close to midnight when it started getting really dark. You know how bright it can get in Big Bend. It's bright because of all those stars. As we looked across towards Mexico from where we were sitting, I noticed an orange light coming from below us, just beyond Lajitas. She quickly ran inside, grabbed her phone, and then called her friend Lucy. After hanging up, she explained that Lucy's husband witnessed something similar several years ago near Study Butte while he was driving home late at night. He told her about these two lights chasing him down the highway before suddenly disappearing as he crossed into Presidio County. Anyway, at this point we were both tired and nothing concrete had happened, so we headed back inside the cabin to hit the hay. So the next day, we decided to return to the park. My wife seemed a bit disappointed. She had hoped for a close encounter with the unknown, something more than just lights in the distance, and hearing about strange tracks. We walked around a bit, but still no sightings. That evening, we decided to give it one last try. We picked a spot near the Rio Grande, where it was quiet and secluded. As darkness enveloped the landscape, we sat there, just watching and waiting. Hours passed. Crickets chirped in the background, and the occasional howl of a distant coyote pierced the night. But the mysterious lights didn't appear. Instead, the air around us began to change, and the temperature dropped. We were about to call it a night when my wife nudged me. "Look," she whispered, pointing to the river. There, in the dim light cast by our camp lantern, we could see something moving across the Rio Grande. It was hard to make out, but it looked like a figure, but not human. It moved with an odd, fluid grace that was mesmerizing. I lifted the binoculars to my eyes, trying to get a better look. The figure was tall, and even at this distance I could tell it was covered in what seemed like fur. Or maybe it was just the shadows. It stopped mid-river, and it felt like it was looking right at us. My heart was racing, but I couldn't look away. "Do you see that?" I asked my wife, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't answer, just nodded, her eyes fixed on the figure. We watched as it reached the other side of the river and disappeared into the thick brush. We sat there for what felt like hours, neither of us willing to move or speak. Finally, I reached over and gently took her hand. "Let's go back to the cabin," I said. We packed up our things quietly and made our way back. When we got back to the cabin, we locked the door and sat on the couch, listening to the silence of the night, both excited and a bit scared of what we had seen. The next morning, we were quiet as we packed up the car to head home. The drive back was uneventful, but the image of that figure in the river stayed with me. I kept going over it in my mind. It wasn't until we were almost home that my wife finally broke the silence. "What do you think that was?" she asked. I shook my head. "I don't know," I replied. "But it sure was something unbelievable, wasn't it?" She nodded. "Yeah, it was something. We haven't been back to Big Bend since then. But sometimes, when we're sitting outside on a clear night, I find myself looking up at the stars and thinking about it. The not knowing can be frustrating, but it's also thrilling, and that's okay. Sometimes, it's about the wonder and the thrill of the unknown. And that night, at the edge of the Rio Grande, we got to do that. So, that's our story. It's not full of dramatic revelations or answers to age-old questions. But it's our experience, a shared moment that we'll never forget. And maybe, just maybe, That's more important than any answer we could have found. I'm Jim, and I've been a trucker for 22 years now, and the youngest of 5 kids. I only say that because it means I don't get rattled easily. My wife Sarah and I live in a small town in Georgia, near where I grew up, with our 2 dogs. We're simple folk, just trying to get by and maybe save a little for our golden years. Honestly, my goal in life is just to spend my days on my back porch, with not a care in the world. Last month, I was on a routine run from Tampa to Atlanta. It was a quiet Tuesday night, around 1:15 a.m., when I hit that long stretch of I-75 north of Ocala. The road was empty, just me and the occasional pair of headlights in the distance. I'd been driving for hours, and my eyes were getting heavy. I decided to pull over at the next rest stop to grab some coffee and splash some water on my face. Normally, that's something I can do with my eyes closed, so to speak. But on that day, that's when things got weird. As I approached mile marker 368, my truck's engine started to sputter. The dashboard lights flickered, and then everything went dark. I coasted to the shoulder, completely powerless. I'd never had anything like this happen before. "Great," I muttered, reaching for my phone to call for help. But my phone was dead too. So was my backup battery pack. It didn't make any sense, but I wasn't worried. At least, not yet. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to figure out what to do next. I rolled my window down, and that's when I noticed how quiet it was. No crickets, no frogs, not even the sound of wind in the trees. It made me think of how my dad described his days in Nam. Feeling uneasy, I grabbed my flashlight from the glove box and stepped out of the cab. The air felt thick and heavy, like right before a big storm, but the sky was clear, stars twinkling overhead. I popped the hood and started checking the engine, even though I knew it was pointless. Whatever was wrong, it wasn't something I could fix on the side of the road. As I leaned over the engine, I heard a soft thud behind me. I turned around slowly, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, and that's when I saw it. About 50 feet away, standing at the edge of the tree line, was something. It was tall, maybe 8 or 9 feet, but thin as a rail. Its skin looked like old tree bark, all gnarled and twisted. But the weirdest part was its shape. It had too many limbs, all bent at odd angles like a praying mantis. I stood there as I watched this thing slowly unfolded itself. Its head, if you could call it that, was just a smooth, featureless bump on top of a long, writhing neck. My flashlight beam caught its eyes. 3 of them arranged in a triangle. They glowed a dull red, like dying embers. As it looked at me, I swear to you, I felt a pressure building in my head, like someone was squeezing my brain. The creature took a step forward, moving in a way that made my stomach turn. It was all wrong, like watching a film played backward and in slow motion. I wanted to run, to jump back in my truck and lock the doors, but I couldn't move. It wasn't fear holding me in place. It was like my body had forgotten how to work. The thing kept coming closer, one jerky step at a time. With each step, the pressure in my head got worse. My vision started to blur, and I could taste copper in the back of my throat. When it was about 20 feet away, it stopped. A low humming filled the air, vibrating in my chest. The creature's body began to shift and change, like smoke trying to hold a shape in the wind. One of its limbs stretched out towards me, growing longer and longer. I could see now that it ended not in a hand, but in something that looked like a cluster of thin, writhing tentacles. All I could think was that I was hallucinating for some reason. Just as those tentacles were about to touch me, a car horn blared in the distance. The creature's head snapped around, and in the blink of an eye, it was gone. Not like it ran away. One second it was there, and the next it just wasn't. The moment it vanished, everything came back to life. My truck's engine roared to life. Crickets started chirping, and I could move again. I didn't waste any time. I jumped in my truck and drove off, my hands shaking on the wheel. I told my wife all about it, and she totally believes me. She knows me well, and I wouldn't make this crap up. I'm not crazy, and I wasn't dreaming. Something impossible happened out there on I-75, and I need to know if anyone else has seen it. Has anyone encountered anything like this near Ocala or anywhere else? I can't be the only one who's seen this thing, can I? Please make a comment if you know anything. Jason Reeves never thought he'd end up in Alaska. After 3 tours in Afghanistan, he'd seen enough action to last a lifetime. But when the nightmares became too much and the bustle of city life too overwhelming, he found himself drawn to the vast wilderness of Denali National Park. There was something about the rugged landscape that soothed his battle-worn soul. 5 years into his job as a park ranger, Jason had settled into a comfortable routine. He spent his days patrolling the backcountry, assisting lost hikers, and occasionally dealing with overzealous wildlife photographers. The quiet life suited him, and he'd almost managed to forget the adrenaline rush of his military days. That all changed on a crisp autumn morning in late September. Jason was doing a routine check of a remote area when he came across something that made him pause. There, in a patch of soft mud near a mountain stream, was a set of tracks unlike anything he'd ever seen before. At first glance, they resembled bear prints, but as Jason crouched down for a closer look, he realized they were far too large. The shape was off too, not quite animal, not quite human. He got down low and studied the impressions, his mind struggling to make sense of what he was seeing. Jason snapped a few photos with his phone, which also marked the GPS location. He tried to convince himself it was probably just a deformed bear print, maybe even a hoax left by some mischievous hikers. But deep down, he was concerned. Something about those tracks stirred up old instincts he thought he'd left behind in the dust of Kandahar. As the days grew shorter and the first snows began to dust the peaks of Denali, Jason found himself returning to that remote spot again and again. He even reached out to an old army buddy who was into this kind of stuff, but no one could offer a satisfactory explanation for what he'd found. Meanwhile, strange occurrences began to pile up around the park. Campers reported eerie howls echoing through the valleys at night. Jason didn't tell them, but the sounds were too deep and resonant to be wolves. A seasoned hiker swore he saw a massive shadowy figure loping across a distant ridge in the twilight hours. And then there were the livestock mutilations on the outskirts of the park, animals torn apart with an almost surgical precision. Jason's colleagues' thoughts were that it was just natural predators, but he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something else was out there, something that didn't fit neatly into the natural order of things. As winter settled over Denali, bringing with it long nights and brutal cold, Jason found himself volunteering for more and more backcountry patrols. His fellow rangers exchanged worried glances, whispering about PTSD and the toll it might be taking on him. But Jason didn't care. He was determined to find answers, even if it meant facing the harsh Alaskan winter alone. One particularly frigid evening, as he was setting up camp near the site where he'd first discovered the tracks, Jason heard a twig snap in the darkness beyond his firelight. He froze, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle at his side, thinking this was it. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the crackle of his fire. And then, just on the edge of his hearing, a low, rumbling growl started to swell. In that moment, as fear threatened to overwhelm him, Jason realized he had a choice to make, and only a few moments to make it. He could retreat to safety and dismiss the whole thing, or he could press on, hopefully uncovering the truth. Jason made his choice. Whatever was out there, whatever was stalking around in Denali, he was determined to face it head-on. But with that decision, the growling stopped. Sleep eluded him that night as he strained his ears for any sign of the creature's return. At the first light of dawn, he packed up camp and set out to follow the fresh tracks that had appeared overnight. The trail led him deeper into the wilderness, winding through spruce forests and across frozen streams. By midday, he found himself at the mouth of a cave, half hidden by a stand of gnarled black spruce. The tracks led straight inside. This was it, he thought. Jason hesitated at the entrance, his flashlight beam disappearing into the darkness beyond. But he knew that if he left now, he might never get another chance to solve this mystery. Taking a deep breath, he stepped into the cave. The air was thick with the musty smell of animal fur and something else, something he couldn't quite place. As he moved deeper into the cavern, his light caught something reflective on the ground. Bending down, he realized it was a military-grade tracking device, smashed to pieces. Before he could process what this might mean, a low growl echoed through the cave. Jason whirled around, his flashlight beam catching a pair of glowing eyes in the darkness. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as he locked gazes with the creature. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall, with a body covered in thick, matted fur. Its face made Jason's blood run cold. It was almost human-like, with a flattened nose and a protruding brow, but there was a look to its eyes that freaked him out, like looking into the eyes of an ape. The creature let out a roar that literally shook loose stones from the cave ceiling. Jason stumbled backward, fumbling for his rifle, but before he could raise it, the beast was upon him. Its enormous hand swatted the weapon away as if it were a toy. Jason found himself pinned against the cave wall, staring into the creature's face. This close, he could smell its hot, rancid breath. He closed his eyes, certain that his life was about to end, but the blow never came. Instead, the creature leaned in close, its nose twitching as it sniffed him. Then, to Jason's utter astonishment, he thinks he heard it speak. "Go!" it growled. With that, the creature released him by shoving him towards the entrance and lumbered back into the darkness. Jason didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled to his feet, snatched up his rifle, and ran from the cave as fast as his legs could carry him. He didn't stop running until he reached his truck, parked miles away at the trailhead. As he sped back towards civilization, his mind reeled from what he had experienced. A creature that shouldn't exist. A creature that could speak. In the days that followed, Jason debated whether to report what he had seen. In the end, he decided against it. It would become chaos if people found out about it. And what would happen to the creature if the wrong people found out about it? Instead, he requested to be assigned a new patrol and gave up that remote section as if it had never happened. As he settled into his new routine, Jason tried to convince himself that it had all been altered reality, a PTSD he was still processing. But deep down, he knew the truth. Jason still finds himself thinking about the creature. He hopes it is still out there, still hidden from the world, but he also prays that he will never, ever encounter it again. As the sun dipped below the horizon in Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, Robert Kleber sat hunched over his computer in the dimly lit ranger station. His eyes, bloodshot from hours of staring online readings, darted back and forth across the screen. Something wasn't right. Robert had been a ranger at the park for over a decade, and he prided himself on his intimate knowledge of Kilauea's rhythms and moods. But the data before him defied explanation. The seismic activity he was observing didn't match any patterns he'd seen before. Not those associated with magma movement, not with tectonic shifts, not even with the occasional deep tremors that sometimes rippled through the island chain. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples as he tried to make sense of it all. The tremors were deep, far deeper than typical volcanic activity, and they were moving, not in the familiar upward path of rising magma, but laterally, as if something was crawling through the Earth's crust. Robert shook his head, trying to dispel the ridiculous notion. He was a man of science, not fantasy. There had to be a logical explanation. As he reached for his mug of now-cold coffee, a low rumble shook the station. Coffee sloshed over the rim, spattering the volcanic activity. He had to understand it, to assess any potential danger to the island and its inhabitants. Robert grabbed his gear and rushed out to his Jeep. As he drove along the winding park roads, his headlights cutting through the darkness, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. This type of thing should never happen, especially without warning from the many sensors they had placed. At the first sensor station, Robert was something far beyond his experience or understanding. Normal volcanic activity he could handle. This, not so much. He fumbled with his radio, desperate to call for backup, to warn anyone about what was happening. But before he could make the call, the ground heaved beneath him. Robert lost his footing and fell hard, his tablet sliding away across the rocky soil. As he struggled to his knees, he saw an expert on the area, but having no idea what was going on. A strange, glistening form was rising from the newly opened hole in the ground. It was organic, that much was clear, but like no living thing Robert had ever seen or imagined. As more of the creature revealed itself, Robert could make out what looked like enormous tentacles, each as thick as an elephant trunk. They writhed and twisted, pulling the rest of the body from the earth. Robert's scientific mind, even in the grip of terror, tried to make sense of what he was witnessing. Was this some ancient creature that had lain dormant beneath the island for millennia? Some unknown species that dwelled in the planet's depths? Or something even more impossible, an alien being that had burrowed up from unimaginable depths? All of it, and none of it made sense to him. He knew he should run, should get in his Jeep and drive as fast and as far as he could. But Robert found himself paralyzed as the creature continued its emergence. He was dimly aware that he was hyperventilating, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. As the thing pulled itself further from the ground, Robert saw what he could only describe as eyes, dozens of them, glowing with a flickering light, swiveling in all directions. And then, all at once, in arms as he fled. His lungs burned, and his legs ached, but fear propelled him forward. He didn't dare look back, convinced that at any moment he would feel the grip of an enormous tentacle around his body. Robert burst out of the trees onto one of the park's access roads. His Jeep sat where he had left it. Without hesitation, he leaped into the vehicle, fumbling with his keys before finally starting the engine. As he sped down the after a quick shower and a strong cup of coffee, Robert couldn't help himself, and he drove back to the park. The morning was bright and clear, a stark contrast to the terrifying events of the night before. As he approached the area where he had encountered the creature, Robert's heart pounded in his chest. But when he arrived at the spot, he found nothing. Nothing at all. The ground was completely undisturbed. There was no giant hole. How could something so massive leave no trace? He checked and rechecked his coordinates, certain he was in the right place. But the landscape remained stubbornly, infuriatingly normal. Robert finally gave up his search. He stood there, surrounded by the peaceful beauty of the park, and felt a profound sense of uncertainty wash over him. The readings on his tablet suggested otherwise, but without physical evidence, he knew no one would believe his story. Robert returned to his Jeep to collect himself. As he drove home, he grappled with what he should do next. Report the incident and risk being labeled a lunatic. Keep it to himself and always wonder, what do you think he should do?